Let's solve homework exercise number 11 from section 3.7. Translate the argument into a symbolic form, then determine whether it's valid or invalid. You can compare the arguments to a standard valid or invalid form. All right. If he has good balance, which is P, right? So if P, then he will get hurt, which is Q, right there. If he gets hurt, which is Q, then another if then. So right arrow, he will go to the hospital. He will go to the hospital, which is R, so that's symbolized R. Therefore, if he has good balance, which is P, then he will go to the hospital, which is R. Okay, so actually, this here argument is valid because on page 186 of the textbook, this form exactly, if P then Q, if the first implies the second implies the third, then the first implies the third is transitive reasoning. Okay, it matches that form exactly, transitive reasoning, and that is one of the four valid forms. So we automatically know by matching it to a standard valid form that this argument is definitely valid, and then the argument is going to be premise number one and premise number two implies the conclusion. Okay, so we got to write that out. All right, so we know that the argument's definitely going to be valid, and the argument is, again, brackets and then parentheses. Premise number one is, parentheses, if P then Q, and premise number two was if Q then R, so a right arrow, if then indicating a right, and if then, those are our two premises, so end the bracket, and then the whole complete statement is an if then, and does that imply the conclusion, which is if he has good balance, P if then implies he will go to the hospital, which is the third statement, R. So that's premise one and premise two, right arrow, conclusion. That's in symbolic form, that is the argument. If we did that truth table for that, we would get all truths in the last line, meaning it's a tautology, meaning the argument is valid. But we don't have to do that because we matched it to one of the four valid forms on page 186 of the textbook. All right, question number 12. We've got translate the argument into symbolic form and fill in, and then determine whether the argument is valid or invalid. So if the dog plays with the ball, we really don't have any, it doesn't tell us what to symbolize it with. So if this is our first statement, we'll just say that's P. So there's my P. Then the dog does not swim in the pond. And I guess since we have a not in there, we'll do not Q for that. Okay, then the second statement is if the dog does not play, remember the dog plays with the ball as P, so not plays would be not Q. Then the dog is interested in something else, which is a third statement, so we'll call it R. Those are premises, and now what's our conclusion? That therefore the dog does not swim. The dog does not swim was not Q, right? Or a disjunction, he is interested in something else, which is R. Okay, so there's our argument in symbolic form. Now we got to determine whether it's valid or invalid. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a form that is one of the four valids or invalids that it fits. So we'll have to go ahead and do a truth table. So we have P, and unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit long, Q and R because it's got three statements. So to start out, we go true, 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 false, 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 4 falses and 4 trues. Then the Q is 2 trues, 2 falses, 2 trues, and 2 falses. And then the R is either every other one, true, false, true, false, true, false, and true, false. Okay? So that's our starting. Now what do we need to do? We have not Q's and not P's in here, right? So we got to do a line for not P, column for not P, which will make it false, 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 true, 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 true. We also have a not Q, so we'll do a not Q. So a not Q will be false, false, true, true, false, false, true, true. Okay, now we can do premise number 1. If P, then not Q, right? There's premise number 1 right here. If P, then not Q. So if true, so if is P and Q, not Q is the first column with the 5th column. If true, then false is actually false. If true, then false is actually false. If true, then true is true. If true, then true is true. If false is automatically true. And here, the if part is all falses, so we know the if then is automatically true. Okay, so we've got that premise number 1. Now we need to do premise number 2. Not P implies R. Okay, so we've got not P implies R. So not P is the if part, R is the conclusion. So if false, then true is true. If false, then false is true. If false, then true is true. If false, then false is true again. If true, then true is true. If true, then false is false. Okay, if true, then true is true, and not P. If true, then false is false. Okay? Premise 1 and premise 2. Now we can do our conclusion, which is not Q or R. Okay, not Q or R. So not Q or R, the 3rd and the 5th columns, true or false, at least one's true, then it's true. Not Q or R, not Q or R, false or false is false. Not Q or R, true or true is true. Not Q or R, true or false is true. Not Q or R, false or true, one true is true. Not Q or R, both are false, so it's false. Not Q is true, R is true, both are true. And then finally, not Q is true, R is false, so the disjunction is true. So now we've got this. Okay, we're running out of room. Okay, all right, now we have to do the two premises together with an and. So premise number 1 and premise number 2, okay, with an and. Okay, so premise number 1 and premise number 2, we're combining them with an and. So we're doing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these 2 columns, the 6th and the 7th, with an and. False and true is false. False and true is false. True and true is true. True and true is true. True and true is true. True and false is false. True and true is true. True and false is false. Okay, that's a false. And finally, the final thing we're going to do is premise number 1 and premise number 2. Does that imply the conclusion, which is that column right there? So If false, this is the if part, this is the then part. Okay, for our final, the two premises together, does it imply the conclusion, which is right here? So this is the if. If false, then true is true. If false, then false is true. If true, then true is true. If true, then true is true. If true, then true is true. If false, then false is true. If true, then true is true. And if false, then true is true. We got all trues in the last line, which means it's a tautology, which means the argument is valid. Again, that last line, we kind of ran out of room. It was, we were doing the statement up here, premise number 1. If P, then not Q, and premise number 2, not P, then R. Does that imply the conclusion not Q or R? Okay, so these two together, premise number 1, number 2, does it imply the conclusion right there? So we did an if then and we got all truths, so the argument is valid. Okay, kind of a long problem because we had to do 8 lines of truth tables because we had different ones there. Okay, we're going to go ahead and conclude this session. If you have any questions, please. All right, we're going to conclude this session here. Again, the argument is valid. This has been your math teacher, Dr. Swerves. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions, send me an email through the inbox using the Canvas course. Again, thank you, and I hope you found this video